This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. I'm also sponsored by Face to Face Games, Canada's premier Magic the Gathering store. Using the promo code MTGMudsta will get you 5% off site-wide, with eligible orders getting free shipping Canada-wide. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game is in my studio, and Seb, Felix, and Maxim are back. Maxim and Felix are playing back the commanders from the last game, with Maxim bringing back his Rionya Fire Dancer. He keeps Mountain, Castle Embrith, Sky Scanner, Lightning Bolt, Solemn Simulacrum, Atsushi the Blazing Sky, and a Wayfarer's Bauble. Felix is playing Cadric Soul Kindler, keeping Evolving Wilds, 3 Planes, Teferi's Protection, Sundial the Infinite, and Aurelia the War Leader. I just can't stop playing Shorikai, I love it so much, keeping Ancient Den, Swords to Plowshares, Ghost Quarter, Arcane Denial, a Plains, an Island, and a Mighty Servant of Luco. Seb has built one of the coolest new Jund commanders in a while, which is Henzie Toolbox Torre. He keeps a Mountain, Rampant Growth, Disciple of Bolas, Ash Barrens, Mana Confluence, Viscera Seer, and Talisman of Impulse. I win the die roll and start us off. I draw and play a Plains. Felix places Evolving Wilds, cracking it to go and find a Mountain. Seb has a Mana Confluence for turn 1, and takes 1 to cast a Viscera Seer, passing after that. Maxim plays a Mountain, and pays 1 for a Wayfarer's Bauble. I just play an Ancient Den and pass. Felix plays a Plains and casts Sundial the Infinite. Seb draws, and in his main phase plays a Mountain. He takes another 1 as he casts a Rampant Growth, and then moving to combat, swings at Max for 1. He passes after that. Maxim draws and plays a Castle Embrith. He then pays the 2 to crack the Bauble, going to find a Mountain, and passes. I've got an Island for my third turn, and then play out Mighty Servant of Luco, passing. Felix plays a Plains, and pays 3 for a Relic of Legends, passing after that. Seb's got a Forest for turn, and taps 2 for a Talisman of Impulse. He then takes 1 from the Talisman and 1 from the Mana Confluence to help cast Henzie. Going to combat, he pokes Max for 1 with a Viscera Seer, passing. Max plays a Mountain, and taps 4 mana, casting Solemn Simulacrum. This lets him get another Mountain, and he passes turn. I draw, and have enough mana for Shorikai. Felix plays a Plains, and then casts Cadric. Much like my turn, he's cast his commander and has nothing else to do, so he passes. Seb draws, and in his main phase, cycles an Ash Barrens to go and find a forest, which he then plays for turn. He then casts a Temur Sabertooth, and goes to combat, swinging Henzie at Max. Max takes the hit for commander damage, and after that, Seb passes. Maxim draws, and has enough mana to cast Rionya, and then goes to combat. He gets to make a token copy of Solemn, and as it enters, goes to find a Mountain. He then swings it at Seb, who takes the hit for 2. Moving to his end step, Maxim exiles the Solemn Simulacrum copy. I draw and play an Irrigated Farmland. I then pay 1 to cast Dispatch and target the Temur Sabertooth, as I have Metalcraft active to exile it. It resolves, and after that, I pass. During my end step, Felix casts Thrill of Possibilities, pitching a card to draw 2. Felix's turn has a Sacred Foundry coming in, untapped, so he takes 2. He then plays Bruce Tarl, and pays the 1 to Cadric to copy it. Moving to combat, he swings Cadric at me and the Bruce Tarl token at Max. As he's had 2 Bruce Tarls coming in, both creatures have Double Strike and Lifelink, and Maxim chumps with Solemn while I just take the 8. Felix gains some life, and after that, he moves to his end step, and with the trigger to sacrifice the token on the stack, ends his turn with the Sundial of the Infinite to keep it. Seb draws and then blitzes out a Somberworld Beastmaster, making a 2-2, a 3-3, and a 4-4 token. Going to combat, he swings the 1-1 Beastmaster at me. I respond by activating Shorikai to draw 2, discard 1, and make a pilot. I still let the 1 go through though. After combat, Seb sacrifices the Beastmaster to the Viscera Seer to draw a card and then scry 1. He passes after that. Maxim has a mountain for turn, and then taps enough to cast Molten Primordial, stealing my pilot token, the Bruce Tarl token, and the Viscera Seer after making a deal with Seb that he won't sacrifice it. Rionya then triggers when he goes to combat, making another Molten Primordial, this time stealing the real Bruce Tarl and Seb's 4-4 Beast, and once the steal resolves, has to resolve the legendary rule. He then swings the Molten Primordials at Felix, and the Beast, Pilot, Viscera Seer, and Bruce Tarl at Seb. With the on-attack trigger from Bruce Tarl, he gives it to a Primordial. And Seb blocks the Pilot token with Henzie. Felix and Seb then take the rest, with Maxim gaining some life. After combat, Maxim sacrifices the stolen creatures, minus the Viscera Seer thanks to his deal, to scry some cards. He then passes after that. I play a Skycloud Expanse as my land for turn, and tap 1 for a Soul Ring. I then activate Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and making a pilot. And then cast Katsumasa the Animator. Moving to combat, I use both of my creatures to crew up the Mighty Servant and swing it at Max. He takes the 6, and I get to draw 2 cards. I then move to discard, passing. Felix has his own Soul Ring, and plays out a determined iteration, and then casts Captain Lannery Storm, paying the 1 to make a copy. Moving to combat, he populates the Lannery copy, and then swings 6 points of damage at me, and makes 3 treasure tokens. Felix then moves to his end step, and once more, ends his turn before sacrificing things thanks to the Sundial. Seb draws for turn, and then blitzes in a Tree Shaker Chimera. Moving to combat, he swings the Chimera at Felix, who's forced to jump it with Cadric. Cadric dies, and Felix's legendary rule immunity with it, which means that he has to get rid of most of his Lannery Storm copies. In his post-combat main phase, Seb sacrifices the Chimera to the Viscera Seer and draws 4 cards. He passes after that. Maxim draws and plays Hazoret's Monument. He then plays Atsushi and pitches a Sky Scanner to the monument and draws a card. He follows up with a Humble Defector and then moves to combat, copying the Atsushi with Rionya, and then has to resolve the legend rule, sacrificing the token copy and choosing to exile his top 2. He reveals a mountain and sees the day. In his second main phase, he plays the mountain and passes. On my upkeep, I put a +1/+1 counter to Shorikai, the Mighty Servant, and a Soul Ring, and then draw for turn. I then play an island, and cast Fabricate. I tutor up an Unlicensed Hearse, and then cast it. I then crew up my Mighty Servant with 2 creatures. I swing it at Max for 7, and he jumps some of the damage with that Sushi, and as it dies, exiles his top 2. He still takes 3 though, which lets me draw 2 cards, and I pass after that. Felix's turn has him recasting Cadric. He then goes to combat, and swings the Lannery Storm at me for 2, and gets to make a treasure token. I take the hit, and with that, Felix passes. During his end step, Seb sacrifices some of his creatures to get some scries, and tries to dig deeper into his library. Seb draws and plays a Swamp. He plays a Glittering Stockpile, and then casts Explore, drawing a card, but doesn't hit a second land. He then pays 3 for a Lifecrafter's Bestiary, and passes to Max. Max draws and plays a Tectonic Giant. He then has enough for Kiki Jiki, and I respond by countering it with Arcane Denial. Moving to combat, Maxim moves to make a copy of the Molten Primordial, but Felix responds by casting Teferi's Protection and phases himself out. The token then gets made, and Max steals Katsumasa and the Viscera Seer, but Seb sacrifices the Seer in response. He then moves to declare attacks, swinging the 2 Primordials and Katsumasa at me for 15. I take the hit, and he passes, giving the creatures back. During his end step, I activate Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and making a pilot, and then activate the Unlicensed Hearse to exile 2 of Max's creature cards from his graveyard. I draw on my upkeep from the Arcane Denial, while Maxim draws 2, and I then put more counters onto my artifacts thanks to Katsumasa. I then draw for turn, and play a tapped Razortide Bridge. I'm then able to cast a very reduced costing Thought Monitor, drawing another 2. After that, I played an Arcane Signet, followed by the Omen Keel. Moving to combat, I crew up the Mighty Servant again, and then activate Katsumasa and target Shorikai. I swing the Servant at Seb and Shorikai at Max, and they both take the hits. I get to draw 2 from the Servant and exile the top 8 and 10 cards respectively from their libraries thanks to the Omen Keel ability. With that done, I then pass through my phases, discarding down to hand size, and passing turn. Felix draws and plays Aurelia. Max responds by casting Lightning Bolt and targets Cadric with the Angel in the stack. And Felix sadly activates the Sundial to save Cadric, but exiles Aurelia from the stack by ending his turn. Seb scries 1 and then draws for turn. He casts a Sepulchral Primordial, reanimating the Solemn Simulacrum, and a Duke Ulder Ravenguard. Seb gets to go and find a mountain from the Solemn, and then goes to combat. He gives the Primordial Haste and Myriad, and swings the original at Felix, making copies for Max and I. With the new tokens coming in, Seb gets to steal more creatures, and one of them is Bruce Taro, which as it enters, he puts the trigger onto the real Sepulchral Primordial. I chump with my Thought Monitor, and Max and Felix take their hits. After that, Seb passes. Maxim draws, playing a tap Myriad Landscape as his land for turn. He casts a Geosurge for 7 mana, and then plays a Demanding Dragon, targeting me, and I sacrifice a pilot token to the trigger. With the rest of his mana, he plays a Swiftfoot Boots, and then equips it to the Molten Primordial. Going to combat, he makes 2 Primordial copies and gets to steal 2 creatures from each of his opponents. He then swings the 2 Primordial copies and the Tectonic Giant at me, and the rest at Seb. With the Giant's trigger, he deals 3 to everyone, and then gives the original Molten Primordial Bruce Taro's trigger. Before blocks, I cast Armed and Armored to animate my vehicles, and block the 2 Primordials with the Omen Keel and the Hearse. Seb blocks the Sepulchral Primordial with his Solemn, Cadric with Ulder, and the Molten Primordial with the Sky Scanner, and Lannery Storm with Henzie. Seb does take damage from Katsumasa and Bruce Taro, while I take the damage from the Giant. With nothing else, Maxim passes. On my upkeep, I add some more +1/+1 counters to artifacts thanks to Katsumasa, and then draw for turn. I use Swords Plowshares and exile the Demanding Dragon and give Maxim some life. I then activate Katsumasa on Shorikai and go to combat. I swing Shorikai at Max, dealing lethal commander damage, and Katsumasa at Felix. Max is taken out, and in my post-combat main phase, I then play with a Thunderhawk gunship, making some Space Marines, and passing after that. Felix draws and plays a Felwar Stone. He then replays Cadric, passing after that. Seb scries 1 and then draws for turn. He sacrifices the Glittering Stockpile to help cast Warstorm Surge, and then blitzes in a Phyrexian Delver, which, as it enters, kills Cadric on the ETB thanks to the Surge trigger. It then reanimates the Somberwall Beastmaster, which makes 3 tokens and deals 2 to me, 3 to Lannery, and 5 to Felix. He then goes to combat and gives the 4/4 haste and myriad with Ulda Ravengard, and then swings everything he can at Felix, which is enough for lethal, winning Seb the game. Game review time. Considering Henzie wants to die, I'm surprised that Seb didn't sacrifice him earlier to the Viscera Seer to try and help reduce the blitz cost. It did give him some savings though, and the fact that he was able to do it with haste and get a card draw is basically what his deck wanted to do anyway. That being said, I could imagine it being even more aggressive the more Henzie dies. Compared to the last time that we saw Maxim play Rionya, this was a lot more tame, only getting on average about 1 or 2 tokens. It's important to know with Rionya, you always get at least 1, so even if you cast her and have a creature out but don't cast any spells, you at least still get some advantage. I think Max had some pretty explosive turns, especially with that Molten Primordial stealing other people's creatures and then getting a token copy of it and stealing even more. He tried to kill me on that last turn of his, and unfortunately he wasn't expecting the Armed and Armored, which let's face it, most people aren't, and I'm actually really glad I kept it in the deck. I feel like I'm refining the deck more and more, and it's getting better and better lines. I'm cutting out some of the chafe vehicles and focusing on the better ones and the better enablers. I loved seeing Cadric out with the Sundial of the Infinite. It basically got rid of the only downside to Cadric's tokens, and I think had Felix been able to manipulate the board a little bit more, he was in a great place to win the game. You saw that turn with the Aurelia coming down, and I'm surprised he used Teferi's Protection to protect Cadric as opposed to let Aurelia resolve. I guess by that point Cadric cost so much that he didn't really want to have to wait a whole other turn to recast it. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.